So I've been debating doing this video for a while because, no one ever wants to sound like John Mayer. I think it's interesting. Anyway, today we are going to see whether or not you can get a John Mayer inspired tone from a Fender Blues Jr. Now I want to highlight the word inspired by. We're not going to go for an exact tone. If those of you who watch my channel, I don't go for exact tones. I go for really cool inspired tones in the spirit of. So that's what we're going for. We're going to play a Stratocaster into a Fender Blues Jr III, the limited edition tweed with the Jensen C12N speaker. Now we're going to start with the knobs at noon, which on this amp is 6 because it goes to 12. Now I'm also going to turn up the reverb a little bit. For reference, the tones that I'm kind of shooting for, the inspired tones that I'm thinking of, are the tones from Continuum or the Live in LA album. Of course, there's a lot of different John Mayer tones you could go for, so I'm going for those very straightforward, clean, and overdriven tones of his from those albums. So let's start out now with the amp knobs set basically at noon, the master volume's at about 5, the volume, which also kind of acts as your gain with the master volume, that's also at 6. So everything is at 6 except for the master, which is at about 5. The fat switch is off. I am on the neck middle setting on the Stratocaster, and I do want to mention one thing that I find helpful, which I talk about in my full Fender Blues Jr. video, is I have the guitar's volume knob backed off to about 9. So let's start off on this tone and see where we get. To tell you the truth, that's a pretty good tone. That's a tone that I would perform with. That's a tone that I like, and honestly, if you were to use that tone in a live setting where you were playing John Mayer, it wouldn't turn anyone's head. Nobody would, just, oh, great song, but not that tone. Ugh. No, that's not going to happen in real life. Come on now. I do think we can tweak it a little further, though, to get a little closer to the tone. To my ear, first of all, the reverb was up too high. Now, I was thinking of the splash that you get there from slow burning, slow dancing. That's like a John Mayer, John Hyatt mashup. But I was thinking of that really notable kind of spring reverb splash that you get right at the beginning of the riff on that song. So I had the reverb up a little too high, so I'm going to back the reverb off a bit. I also thought it sounded slightly thin and slightly edgy. So because of that, I'm going to push the bass a bit. I'm going to push the bass up to 8. Then I'm going to pull the treble and the mids back to 5. Now lastly, I'm also going to turn the volume down slightly because I find that this amp settles in and gets a little bit more saggy and a little bit more responsive if it's not up quite too loud. The volume that I'm at is one that it wouldn't be quite loud enough on its own in a band setting, but it would be fine if you were mic'd. You'd be able to hear your amp on stage to kind of use as its own monitor, and then you could go through the PA, but on its own it wouldn't be quite loud enough to compete with a drummer. So keep that in mind, that's where I'm at volume-wise. So I'm going to back the master volume from 5 back to about 3.5. So let's check out this tone now and see where this gets us. I think that's better. I think that's really right along the right track, and that's a tone that I would be happy with. Now again, I do want to reiterate, is that the exact tone? No, but you're not going to get the exact tone from this rig. You know, of course, the rig that John Mayer uses is quite a bit more hefty when it comes to price, and particularly the rig he did use at that time. Also, I'm not John Mayer, and neither are you, and please don't ever lose sight of the fact that, you know, a player's touch sensitivity is just as important as the tone. I get very, very burnt out of the phrase tone is in your fingers, but there is truth to it. So just keep in mind that there's so many differences, you know, speaker configuration, let alone the fact that you have to consider the situation to which you're hearing stuff. If you're listening to Continuum, you're listening to it professionally recorded and going through EQs and compressors. Same with live in LA, and of course that was also recorded in a big theater, and you have to take into consideration the fact that it's sitting within another band context, which could be different than what you're doing at the time. So all these nuances affect your tone. Now, I want to shift gears slightly. Now that found a tone that I was at least pretty happy with. Let's now add in some pedals, because of course he is one of the most inspirational players when it comes to this sort of modern guitar effects craze. He's of course known for using some out of production pedals that have become pretty expensive over the years. So there are a couple of alternatives. First of all, I am using a Keeley Katana Mini. He was known for using the Keeley Katana. Katana Mini really delivers very much the same tone in just a smaller package that is still available. They're $100 new. You can find them even cheaper used, as opposed to some of the limited runs of the bigger pedal that are fetching quite a bit of money nowadays. Now, I'm not using this to go nuts. I'm actually using this as a basis for my tone for this next part. So I'm going to go back up to the knobs at 6 and try this tone out and just see kind of how it sounds with the Katana running into it, which not only boosts it, but it kind of gives it a bit of sag. It gives the notes a bit of collapse into themselves, as opposed to just having that raw, open tone that you get from the Blues Jr. Let's try it with the Katana and see how it sounds. Now that's a really good tone. I like that tone. I think that's still a hair on the edgy side. However, keep in mind the fact that we're playing this in a room, totally solo guitar, not in a band context, and in a band context that would sit pretty nicely. On that note, you'll notice that I rolled up the volume a little bit. It does get a bit more brash and edgy when you do that. Now, when you're sitting on your own in the room, you might go, it's a little too edgy. When you're playing in a live band situation, that little bit of edge might be just that little bit of extra that you need to have good presence and to have your tone cut through. So now let's try it, and we're going to jump a tube screamer off of it. And the tube screamer that I'm using today is the Maxon 808. Now, John Mayer was famous for using the TS10 among many other pedals, but the TS10 is one that's often, attributed to him and for being on his board, which was an out-of-production tube screamer. And according to some literature by Analog Man, the Maxon 808 is a reasonable alternative, we'll say, to the TS10. They're pretty similar pedals as opposed to like an Ibanez TS808 or a TS9, which also, honestly, both would work really well. They're all very, very similar pedals tonally. There are some little nuanced differences, but they all work pretty well. But let's try it out with the Maxon 808 jumping off of the Katana and see how that sounds. Now, I like that. That's good. It does kind of give me that reminiscent tone of what he was doing on, particularly live in LA. Not quite as much drive, not quite as much saturation, but it has that nice kind of, there's a smoothness to the tone with a little bit of hair around the edges and still just kind of that hint of the note attack right in the middle that it's all surrounding. I do think that with the Blues Jr., it kind of went down that boxy road a little bit, which Blues Juniors, unfortunately, that's one of the downsides of them, is depending on how you dial them in, they can sound a little boxy. So now let's back off the EQ again, just like we did at the beginning. So back off the EQ again and then try the same thing using the Maxon 808 and the Katana and see if it tames the boxiness. Now, I think that worked really well as well. It did also drop the gain a little bit. It seemed just a little bit even less saturated than before, but the whole thing I thought came together really well. And again, if you were to go live and do a John Mayer cover with that rig, nobody would jump out and be like, well, it's not the exact tone that he used. It's an okay performance, but it's not the exact tone. Come on now. That doesn't happen. We're way more in tune to this than the audience is really going to be, unless you get one of those guitar players in the audience who's kind of sitting in the front row, like checking out your gear and trying to decide whether or not he thinks you're killing it, and nobody wants to play for that guy. I digress. Folks, I hope that this video has helped you if you are a fan of John Mayer looking for some reasonably priced tube amps and how you can get an inspired by tone. In all seriousness, it is one of the questions that I get asked the most is, hey, can this amp or that amp get a John Mayer / SRV tone? Which is kind of interesting because for all their similarities and for as much as SRV was an inspiration, the tones and the style of playing to me are also very, very different. They each have a completely unique voice. So that's where I see all of this happening. But I think that this is a really cool tone that I at least think is good. Please let us know in the comments. What do you think? Is this a tone that you would play with? Does this help give you the right kind of direction in how to get some of the artist tones that you're looking for? Let us know in the comments. I'm Jack Fossett. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And support me on Patreon if you'd like personal gear tips.